بكم في منتدى حرمون الثقافي. دخل الصراع في سوريا عامه الرابع عشر دون أن يبرز أي ضوء في نهاية.
No light at the end of the tunnel. And as the conflict dragged on, resulting in the death of hundreds of thousands and millions becoming refugees, the world began to turn its back to a Syria that is now divided into 4 areas of control, each dominated by de facto powers and unelected governments. The US, which plays a major role in this conflict, has, despite its strong statements demanding Assad to go, adopted a policy of 2 directions. It has acted against the regime's crimes by imposing harsh political and economical sanctions. It has also supported the opposition forces in such a way that they are neither defeated nor victorious. The US has adopted a policy that aims to change the regime's behavior. Our seminar today is about the US policy regarding the conflict in Syria. My guest is Mr. Nicholas Granger, Syria Regional Platform Director. Hello, Nicholas. How are you?
أنا أريد أن أبدأ معك.
I would like to start talking to you, Nicholas. As I mentioned in the introduction, the American regime does not allow or has not allowed any party to the conflict to achieve victory or suffer defeat. The question here is, what are the determinants and factors that led the United States to formulate its policy in such a way or adopt such a policy?
And I think I'll switch to English if this is all right.
Yeah, sure.
Just to make sure that my answers are clear. But first of all, before I answer your question, Esma, I want to thank the Harmoon Center, the Harmoon Cultural Forum, and my dear friend Esma Effendi for hosting this discussion this evening. It really is a pleasure for me to be with such a distinguished audience and in the company of such distinguished people focused on the issue of Syria. This is something that we as the United States take very seriously, and so I hope that during our discussion this evening I can provide some more insight into the role of the United States, the work that we are doing to help resolve the crisis, the conflict in Syria. You may know that we were forced to suspend the operations of our embassy in Damascus in 2012. But since that time, we have continued to remain engaged in Syria by covering Syria remotely. And as you mentioned, I am the director of our Syria Regional Platform, which is our diplomatic mission covering Syria from here in Turkey, from Jordan, and from elsewhere. So that mere fact, I think, is a demonstration of the commitment that we have as the United States to continue to remain engaged in Syria. Additionally, we have been, since 2011, have invested billions of dollars in meeting the needs of the Syrian people through humanitarian assistance, through stabilization assistance, in order to be able to stabilize the situation and create the environment to be able to achieve a sustainable political solution in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. So fundamentally, the United States believes that the best hope for Syrians is a political solution under the framework of UN Security Council Resolution 2254. So to answer your question specifically, I would just point out that in addition to the various components of Security Council Resolution 2254, we think that the only way to be able to have a solution is one that is inclusive, that meets the vision and the will of all Syrian people. We also think that in order to be able to achieve a durable, lasting political solution in Syria, that the territorial integrity of the Syrian state and its unity is vital as well, as articulated in Security Council Resolution 2254. At the beginning of the Biden administration, the U.S. government conducted a comprehensive review of our policy, of our strategy on Syria, in order to ensure that we could make meaningful progress in advancing the components of UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and in resolving the Syrian conflict. As a result of that policy review, we decided to focus U.S. efforts on stabilizing the situation in Syria through 4 pillars. The first is to ensure that Daesh cannot reemerge. The second is to reduce violence and to ensure that ceasefires are respected. The third is to improve humanitarian access. And the fourth is to ensure accountability for atrocities and the promotion and respect of human rights. These 4 pillars we see as being fundamental to be able to advance a just and sustainable political solution in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254.
طيب نحن نعلم.
We know, Nicholas, that the inability of the opposition to create an alternative for the regime was in one way or another a justification for the United States not to adopt a policy or a harsh or a tough policy to remove the Syrian regime, because this is going to lead to chaos, and this will allow jihadist groups and terrorism, and this is something that this is a scenario that the region cannot bear. The question here is, what is the reason for the absence of the American real will, so to speak, to provide like actual support for the opposition militarily and politically? Because this support or such support will definitely lead to create an alternative for the regime in Damascus for the opposition, and of course this will help by controlling or taking power or assuming power and achieving stability. Such American support would have proven to be very important. So why do you think there was an absence of this well?
Has been committed and remains committed to supporting the Syrian opposition and Syrian civil society, because we continue to believe that the only viable solution to the conflict in Syria is through an inclusive, Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process as outlined in UN Security Council Resolution 2254, facilitated by the UN. So when we talk about military support or political support, again, we think the only viable solution is through a political solution. And this is why we think that the opposition and civil society are key components, as outlined in Security Council Resolution 2254. We continue to work with the UN, with our allies, with our partners, to ensure that the opposition is included in determining what the future of Syria will be, because we see the opposition as being the mouthpiece for the Syrian people, and that's vital.
نعم. نيك هناك يعني مصطلح دائما عندما
You use, when we talk about the American policy towards Syria or regarding the situation in Syria, the first sentence that comes to mind is the changing of the regime's behavior. So can you please tell us if there's any concrete understanding of the content of this policy, and what do you mean by that?
The regime's behavior, let us not forget that the regime's behavior has led to the death, the suffering and the displacement of millions of Syrians. Almost half of the population of Syria from before 2011 has been affected by the regime's violent behavior. The regime's behavior has also led to hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians being killed by pro-regime forces. And the regime's behavior is responsible for the continued disappearance and arbitrary detention of over 130,000 men, women, and children. Likewise, the regime's behavior is responsible for Syria now being considered a narco-state. And fundamentally, the regime's behavior, its recalcitrant behavior, its inability, its unwillingness to cooperate with the UN and to engage with the opposition, the regime's behavior has blocked any meaningful progress toward a political resolution of the conflict in Syria. So this is the regime's behavior. I could go on with other examples, but this is the behavior that we are seeking to change. We will only see real progress toward a resolution of the conflict in Syria when the regime takes meaningful, tangible steps to engage, which it has not done to this point. As I said before, a political process is an important component of UN Security Council Resolution 2254. But another important component is accountability. Accountability for the behavior I mentioned, for the atrocities that have been committed. And so without accountability, there can be no true resolution of the conflict as well. And to realize accountability, let me give you a specific example of U.S. support in this regard. We support the UN Commission of Inquiry, the independent, impartial, and international mechanism to document human rights abuses and violations of international law. We also assist in investigations and criminal prosecutions of the most serious crimes. And we strongly support the vital work of Syrian civil society organizations that they're doing every day to document these abuses and try to lay the groundwork for true accountability. Because without accountability, without engagement across the whole spectrum of Syria's population and the civil society, without following the framework laid out in UN Security Council Resolution 2254, there can be no true political solution. And it's imperative, this is why we are pointing to the changer of the regime's behavior, because the regime must take the steps needed.
Mm-hmm.
There are reports of a US-European initiative to set up an early recovery fund based in Damascus that would finance projects in different Syrian regions. This seems like an idea or a step towards rehabilitating Assad and his regime. However, we can see that there are other statements on the US behalf that suggest a continuation of a tough US policy towards the regime. So what is the real position of the United States today?
Well, the position of the United States regard is clear. We will not normalize relations with the Assad regime without authentic progress toward a political solution to the underlying conflict. As I said just a few moments ago, this progress will only happen once the regime takes tangible, meaningful steps to implement Security Council Resolution 2254 and resolve the conflict. Until the regime takes these steps, our sanctions will remain in full effect, and we will not normalize our relations with the regime. At the same time, we recognize the enormous needs inside Syria. This is why we are supporting stabilization projects in areas outside of regime control, in the northeast and the northwest of Syria. This year, we have provided over $75 million to support stabilization projects across various sectors in Syria to support healthcare, education, the provision of essential services, the support of the work of civil society. These projects focus on helping local communities, in addition to supporting civil society and the Syrian opposition. And these projects that I just mentioned are in addition to the more than $500 million in humanitarian assistance that we've given this year. So we are finding ways to make sure that while we don't engage with the regime, we're not normalizing our relations with the regime until they take the steps that they need to, we also are finding ways to meet the needs of the Syrian people. When it comes to engaging with the Syrian regime, we have stressed to regional partners and those who do engage with the regime that any engagement with Damascus should focus on credible steps to improve the humanitarian, the human rights, and the security situation inside Syria. We share many of the same goals, for instance, as our Arab partners with respect to Syria, to include reaching a solution to the Syrian crisis in line with 2254, improving the humanitarian access to all Syrians, building security and stability to ensure that Daesh cannot resurge, creating safe conditions for the eventual return of refugees, reducing Iranian influence, and countering captive trafficking from Syria. These are all important things to address, and this is what we've encouraged people who do engage with the regime to push forward on.
Let's now move to the latest developments in the region, particularly the Israeli war on Gaza. Following the Aqsa flooding operation on 7th of October, Israel's war on Gaza has expanded both in time and geography to include other countries like Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Yemen, the Houthis, and Israel is now targeting some Iranian targets in Syria. Can we expect a shift, do you think, in U.S. policy towards a political solution in Syria that may pave the way for a Syrian solution?
As I said earlier, the United States remains committed to a political solution in Syria in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254. And that is important regardless of what's happening in the region. Of course, you have to take regional events into consideration, but the U.S. policy remains the same. As I said before, the U.S. efforts under this administration have focused on four main things: ensuring that Daesh cannot reemerge in Syria, to pose a threat to Syrians, to the region, to the rest of the world, to expand humanitarian access to all Syrians who are in need, to ensure accountability for atrocities and promotion of human rights, and to reduce violence inside Syria. These are the four areas, the four pillars that we focus on, and we will continue to focus on these four policy priorities under the umbrella of advancing a political solution in Syria in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254.
However, perhaps there is another possibility, Nicholas. We know that the stability in the region is very important and that requires a political solution in Syria that would restore the country's territorial unity. However, it is believed that should an agreement between the United States, Turkey, and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, this agreement or this accord could pave the way for a viable political solution in Syria. Are there any such tendencies? What do you think? Can we be close to such a solution? I'm giving you options, you know.
This is a question I've heard many times, and my answer always is that ultimately any viable solution to the Syrian conflict must be determined by Syrians themselves. This is the ultimate point. And this is the essence of UN Security Council Resolution 2254. And this is why we as the United States support an inclusive, Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process facilitated by the UN. As I said earlier, we work with allies, we consult and partners, we consult with them to find ways to fully implement UN Security Council Resolution 2254 to achieve a political solution to the crisis, to be able to support Syrian opposition and Syrian civil society. For example, we have established a dialogue with the government of Turkey that to address issues in Syria, and we have regular dialogue with other allies, with partners, to be able to find ways to cooperate under the framework of UN Security Council resolution, and ultimately to be able to support the vision of Syrians for their own country. Because ultimately, as I said at the beginning, it's for the Syrian people to determine what their country should look like, what the future should look like, and the U.S. policy has been to do everything we can to support that vision.
There is no solution without America, and there is no solution with the presence of America. So, what can we do? We want an answer that is so clear about what should happen. Or what do you recommend? What do you advise the opposition to do?
Now, first of all, as I said before, the United States is committed to supporting Syrian opposition and Syrian civil society, which remain absolutely essential to achieving a political solution to the conflict. A lasting political solution can only be achieved through an inclusive process that represents the will of all Syrians, and an inclusive and unified opposition is essential to making Syrian voices heard. To this end, it is vital that the opposition includes voices of all Syrians in dialogues and in decisions on the future of Syria. And all Syrians should be included, regardless of their gender, their political affiliation, their ethnicity, religion, or other factors. It's also vital that the Syrian opposition be included in any discussion about the future of Syria, because they are the mechanism, Syrian opposition and civil society are the mechanism through which Syrian voices are able to be heard. This is a core tenet of UN Security Council Resolution 2254, and one that we actively support in our engagement with the opposition, with civil society, and in working with the UN to make sure that the opposition and civil society are included in these various processes, whether it's the work of UN Special Envoy Geir Pedersen, the efforts to convene the Constitutional Committee, or other efforts to push forward with a political solution.
Nicholas,
I'm done with the questions I was supposed to ask you, so thank you very much for the answers. We would like now to have some questions, if we may. However, we are very much limited by time, so let me apologize from now that I can't collect all the questions. Can we just follow a certain order in collecting some questions? Nicholas, you can't hear me? Thank you very much, Nicholas. I have actually got two questions, so I'm a little bit greedy. So my question number one question please, just one question. We have no time. The first question is, do we have a real orientation, do we have any plans for the United States to withdraw from northeast Syria? This is my first question, and I'm going to ask the second question anyway. What are the reasons so far that, or what are the challenges to, what is preventing those who are normalizing relations with Assad? What is stopping people or countries from punishment? I hope the question is clear. Like, what is stopping people who are normalizing with the regime from being punished? Would you like to have all the questions and then respond to them, or answer them question by question? Let's move to the second question. Second question about about the fact that the Syrians should lead their future. However, in northeast Syria, there are the United States. To what limit are the communities in northeast Syria able to lead their own lives? We saw what's happening, for example, where there were some fightings or some clashes between the communities there, and the Americans were just looking at them. So why is the American regime? You keep talking about this is an area that is under your control. SDF is the one that is leading the situation there. You also talked about Syrian opposition. Are you referring the opposition institutions? If you support the institutions, they do not support all the Syrians. So if you want to, why do you deal with the Syrian people just by dealing with the PKK, or just with the opposition institutions that are not recognized by all Syrians? Hello and good evening. Well, of course, I have got a lot of questions. However, I just want to raise a few questions. I'm here basically just to ask questions or to give a service to the guests. As we listen to you, we would like you to listen to us as representatives of the Syrian people. We would like you to listen to us. So, Asma mentioned that the American government imposed sanctions, tough sanctions on the Syrian regime. I don't know what she means by tough. Yesterday there was a flight from Syria to Riyadh in spite of the Caesar's sanctions. So I don't know what she meant by tough sanctions. If these tough sanctions are not working, how come we can call them tough? Sanctions should be an excuse that should not be accepted by the Syrian regime. The sanctions, like the Syrian people are punished by these sanctions rather than the government. So in front of everybody, it seems that America is punishing the Syrian regime, but it seems that nothing is happening. You haven't done anything about the Captagon. You haven't done anything about the Caesar's law. You also say that you are in the region to fight Daesh, and you are leading a coalition of 82 countries. I wonder why the Americans have had such a fiasco, such a failure. You can't defeat a group of fighters who number 200 or 300,000 strong. So over a decade, and all the technology you have, and all the communication, and all the development, the developments you have, you still haven't been able to fight Daesh. Can you please tell us who's arming Daesh? Who's arming Daesh with ammunition, with arms? How can they live in the desert for many years? Thank you. I have more questions. Thank you. Sorry, we are limited by time. Asma mentioned that the opposition have not been able to create an alternative for the regime. All we need is access to voting, and we would have been able to create an alternative regime. I'm really sorry, we are limited by time, so we can't take more questions. Nicholas? I'm sorry, we are limited by time. We can't have questions from everybody. I'd like to ask one question, please. I can't hear everybody unless they use the mic. Mic. After the United Nations resolution, I'm sorry, I can't hear the question. He's too close to the mic. After the United Nations Resolution 2254, we don't hear about the will of the international community for a solution in Syria, and that means the United States does not have the will for a solution. The United States says, and you have just mentioned that the solution has to be Syria-based, and there is one party that refuses all kinds of resolution. They don't want to be a party at the table. The United States brought all the parties in Bosnia until they brought every party to one room to find one solution. So what are the things, or how can we force the Syrian regime to sit at the table and accept a political solution? Thank you. Shall we have one more question? I know we're running out of time, but Nicholas, it's your time. Yes, please, over there. Hello. This is a direct question. Previously, when Arabs started normalizing relations, the United States does not seem to be happy with that. However, they were not very much against it, it seems. So now talking about Turkish normalization with the Syrian regime, but now this has a political implication. Isn't the United States worried about a new, maybe for example, a new solution, especially that outside of Geneva and the discussions in Geneva, some parties have been discussing in the United States and in Astana. How will the United States act if there is any, for example, political platform? I can't hear very well, Nicholas. I'm sorry. I'm doing my best.
Thank you very much for all the questions.
questions. And
you can't skip us. We have attended here to ask questions. We have a specific time. We have a limited time. Sorry. He can't leave without answering our questions. Can we please be quiet? Can we please be quiet?
Just a moment. I would like to actually respect everyone who's asked questions to try to give some responses, and then I would like to. I'm happy to open the floor to a few more, because for me, I can tell you as a representative of the United States, the most important thing, rather than you hearing from me, is for me to hear from you. So this is one of the reasons why I find this type of discussion extremely helpful. Tamam. So there have been a number of questions about the United States and what it is that we're really doing, our perspective on various developments. I addressed a number of things in the discussion with Asma. When it comes to the northeast of Syria, our military presence there is focused on Daesh. That has been very clear from the very beginning. Focused on first of all, liberating the area from Daesh, the scourge and the terror that Daesh imposed upon people, and then helping to stabilize the communities. That is the reason that we're in the northeast of Syria, why we have a military presence, and that is the sole purpose of our mission there. When it comes to making sure that whether it's people in the northeast of Syria, whether it's people in the northwest, in Idlib, in the areas controlled by the regime, it's important that all Syrians have a mechanism to have their voices heard. And this comes back to what I said before about our support for the Syrian opposition and for Syrian civil society, finding ways for Syrians to be able to make their voices heard. This is a perfect example, what we're seeing tonight, that people having an opportunity to have their voices heard, to say this is what we want our country to look like. Because again, ultimately, from the side of the United States, we support the efforts of the Syrian people to improve the situation of their country, to help to rebuild their country and to be able to create a better future. That ultimately is what we are trying to do. When it comes to the engagement of countries directly with Damascus, as I said earlier, the United States does not approve or does not support moves to normalize relations with Damascus, and we're very cautious about even engagement. There's a difference between normalization and engagement, some countries say, but even engagement with the regime should seek to address the regime's behavior. As we already laid out, the regime is the party that isn't coming to the table. It's the regime that is creating the situation. The regime laid the situation for Syria that we see today. What the regime did before 2011, it was the courageous Syrian people who rose up and said, we're done with what the regime is doing. It's the Syrian people who said that we want to see a change in our country. We want to be able to have a better future. And it's the Syrian regime today that continues to reject the calls of the Syrian people for a better future. And this is why we believe that any engagement with the Syrian regime needs to make sure that the Syrian regime actually changes its behavior, actually comes to the table and is willing to address the fundamental things that have caused the conflict. Because without addressing the regime's behavior, without addressing the vision and the aspirations of the Syrian people, there can be no resolution to the conflict, which is why the United States continues to push for addressing these issues, supporting the Syrian people and the Syrian opposition and civil society.
نعم أنا للتوضيح فقط.
Just to clarify, and I apologize if you allow me. He has to use a mic, I can't use him. We do not represent Haramoon. If you are here to talk to Haramoon, we are not Haramoon. When you speak without a mic, nobody will hear you. That the interpreter won't hear you, and he won't be able to interpret your question or whatever you say. I can't take questions. I can take questions the way I will because we have a limited time. We can't take all questions. I have just asked for a permission from my guest for 3 questions. Please go ahead. Please don't make interventions haphazardly until you get the mic or have access to the microphone. I believe that it is very weird that the United States does not know that Daesh is a Syrian, Iranian, a Russian intelligence group. It is very difficult that the United States has not diagnosed that yet. And as long as Russia and Iran are supporting Daesh, also the Chinese expansion in the region, we have to remove this regime. The key to any solution in this region is to remove this regime, and consequently the Russian and Chinese project will come to a stop. This is pinned on the interests of the Syrians and the Americans alike. Thank you very much. Mr. Nicholas, so far I don't understand completely what you mean by change the behavior of the regime. A month ago in France there was a judgment or a sentence that Assad is a war criminal, so he is somebody who's running away from justice. How can we change, and what is the importance of changing the behavior of such a person? So he talked about political process and he talked about different issues. How can we have such a person or convince such a person to sit at a table and make discussions and negotiations? In the Bosnia, there was military strikes in order to force everybody to sit at the table and make the Dayton Agreement. So if you don't think in that strategy, and if you don't pressure or don't have a serious pressure on the regime won't change his behavior. It has become a habit of his to act like that. So when you talk about the fact that you want the regime to change his policy, you say it's like you're asking us to square the circle, which is something impossible. So I would love to have an answer about that, please. Just ask your question directly, please, without beating about the bush and without telling lots of stories. You're saying that the United States wants to change the regime's behavior. So why have you like for example, removed the article about punishing those who normalize with the regime? Did you not intervene to change that item or withdraw that item or that article from the agreement? And the other laws do not have any kind of punishments. The only law was this article which you, the American administration, has removed. How can we believe you? You keep saying that you pressure the regime, and all the funding the militias are getting the funding has come, about 70% of their fund has come from Iraq, and the Americans try to track every single dollar. So how can we believe that you are not supporting the regime and you don't want to resurface the regime? You say that you want a democratic area. Why don't you support Democrats in the region? For example, you are specialized in the SDF area. Your government has announced for a reward of $8 million for those who can have information about Kandil people in the Democratic Union of a Syrian party, not a party that is affiliated with the PKK, and still you haven't done anything about that. Every day Jamil Pagheta eats lunch with Mazloum Abdi, And in spite of the fact that there is $1 million reward for anybody who has information about that, how can we believe that you are administrating the area or managing the area in a way that benefits the Syrian people? I'll have the last question from this lady because I promised her. Because she's a lady. Yes, because she's a lady. My question is about ladies. So a lot of women who are returning from a whole camp to the Euphrates, like to the east of Euphrates, face a lot of challenges. A lot of women coming back from a whole camp to the east of Euphrates in Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa face a lot of challenges. What are the efforts of the like American supported groups or the international coalition in supporting this group of women? Thank you. Nicholas.
There are a few more women who had some questions. If we can let them.
Okay.
So I think we have one or two women who had questions, and then we can.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I make my question in English? Can I make it in English, please?
بالإنجليزي بالعربي مثل الشيء.
It may not be the best comparison between the two regimes because of the contextual differences between the both of them. But in 2003, Saddam regime was removed by a military intervention, and that was expected to happen at some point for the Syrian regime that endured that long. So was it because of first, did the US need an enabling myth like that was used when Saddam's regime was overthrown, like the imminent threat, or is it because the military intervention in Iraq was doomed to failure? So that would be my question, and thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you all for both your questions and your comments. Like I said earlier, for me it's very important to hear what you have to say. My answers may not be sufficient for what you want, but what I can tell you is I've heard everything that you've said. I will take that back. My team will take that back, and it will inform the way that we approach this very important issue. There was a specific question about the returns of people from the Al-Hol camp, and I can tell you that from the U.S. side, this is something that we have been supporting actively. There have been both the returns from Al-Hol to Iraq, as well as the repatriation of other foreigners back to their home countries. But importantly, we've seen a growing trend of Syrians being able to go back to their home communities in Manbij, in Raqqa, in Deir ez-Zor. And from the U.S. side, we think that the only way for these to be sustainable is to be able to make sure that the communities that people are going back to have the support that they need. So we are making sure that our stabilization programming in the northeast of Syria is focused on both supporting communities as well as the people who are returning in order to be able to make sure that these returns are sustainable, that people have the services that they require, not just the people returning, but also the communities as well, to be able to address the needs. Many of the people who are returning are female-headed households, making sure that they have access to livelihoods, to economic opportunities, that there's access to education, healthcare, other needs, both for the returnees, their families, as well as the host communities, or the communities that they belong to. So this is something that we will continue to do because we think that addressing the situation in Al-Hol, and not just Al-Hol, addressing the situation for Syrians who have been displaced multiple times is extremely important. This is a key component of being able to stabilize the country, to be able to make sure that Syrians have opportunities and are able to rebuild their lives. So this is an important thing that we're doing. In terms of the regime's behavior, there have been many questions that have talked about the regime's behavior. From the U.S. side, we are very skeptical about the regime changing its behavior. I share the skepticism that has been expressed. But we see sanctions. We see the international. The international political attention on the Syria conflict as very important, and this is again one of the reasons why we are not normalizing our relations with the regime. And we tell countries who do decide to engage with the regime that they should use that engagement to push the regime to resolve the conflict. It's only through that type of international pressure, because it is clear that the Syrian regime craves an end to the conflict in so much as that they can be seen as to return back to life as normal. But we shouldn't allow the regime to go back to life as normal. We should continue to show that they are responsible and that they need to play a role in resolving the conflict.
نعم. نيكولاس شكرا لك. أنا أريد.
Thank you, Nicholas. I would like I think this is enough for now, collecting questions and the time allocated for the seminar. We talked in this seminar about the United States policy about the situation in Syria, about the conflict in Syria. Our guest was Nicholas Granger. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for your time.